The other woman was wearing Camille's favorite shade of red when she sat down at Archer Thorne's right hand. And smiled like she'd always belonged there. The Thorne Group's 25th anniversary gala had taken over the entire ballroom of the Fairmont in Ottawa that evening. 300 guests, crystal chandeliers, the kind of white linen that never creased no matter how long the night ran. It was the sort of room Camille Vaillant-Thorne had helped build. Not the walls, not the chandelier, but the names on the invitations, the placement of the centerpieces, the seating chart she'd spent 3 evenings adjusting so that old business rivalries never found themselves sharing bread rolls. She had done all of it. She did it every year. And yet when the gala director handed her an envelope at the door with her table number, Camille found herself walking to table 11. Table 11 was near the back, near the service entrance and a pillar that would have partially blocked her view of the stage. It was the kind of table where you seated a distant cousin's spouse. Someone polite enough to be invited and easy enough to overlook. The head table where Archer sat had room for 8. Rhys Dunbar was already in seat 2. Camille read the name card herself. She stood there long enough to read it twice. Rhys Dunbar. Senior partner at Dunbar & Associates, the firm the Thorne Group had been working with on their expansion into Calgary. Camille had shaken her hand at a fundraiser in February and found her confident. Nothing more, or so she had thought. Now she was sitting in the chair Camille had occupied at every company dinner for 16 years. Camille placed her own card on table 11, moved to the far side of it and sat down. She smoothed her dress. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from the server who came by immediately. She did not cry. She did not call Archer's phone. She did not look toward the head table again. That was the moment Adelaide Thorne noticed. Adelaide was 71 years old, and still wore her silver hair pinned in the same way she had since the early days of the company, when she and her late husband Frederick had run the whole operation out of a single leased office in Canada. She sat at the far end of the head table and she had seen Camille walk in. She had watched her read the place card. She had watched her walk to table 11 without a word. Adelaide set down her wine glass carefully. She rose from her chair. The room didn't stop. Conversations continued. The pianist at the far end kept playing. A board member laughed too loudly at something across the table. But when Adelaide Thorne stood and began walking across the ballroom floor, the people who had known her long enough understood something was coming. Adelaide did not cross a room without purpose. She stopped at the microphone near the podium. She did not tap it for attention. She simply waited until the nearest conversations quieted, the way people quiet when they sense something heavy arriving. Before my son begins his remarks, Adelaide said, her voice clear and unhurried, I have something I'd like to say to this room. Archer looked up from the head table. A faint tightening moved across his jaw. 25 years ago, Adelaide continued, your father and I signed the papers for the Thorne Group at our kitchen table in Canada. We were 38 years old and the bank had just approved our 3rd application. She paused. We celebrated that night with takeout pho and a bottle of $6 wine. It was the best evening of our lives. A soft ripple of warmth moved through the room. I say that because this company was never built on money alone. It was built on loyalty. On the kind of trust you offer another person when you decide to build something together. Her eyes moved to the head table. Which is why I find it necessary tonight to acknowledge the woman who has stood beside my son at every gala, every board meeting, every difficult year this company has faced since the beginning. Adelaide turned and looked directly at table 11. Camille, please come up here. The room shifted. Archer pushed back from his chair. Mum. Adelaide did not look at him. Her eyes stayed on Camille. Camille sat very still. The woman beside her, a board member's wife she'd met only once, touched her arm gently. Camille breathed once, then rose. She walked from table 11 across the ballroom with the weight of the room following her. And she did not hurry. And she did not look at Rhys Dunbar. And she did not look at Archer. She stopped beside Adelaide. Adelaide placed a hand on Camille's arm and addressed the room. This is the woman who rebuilt the relationship with the Vancouver office when it nearly collapsed in 2019. This is the woman who spent 3 weeks in Halifax last spring, when the residential project hit environmental delays, sitting at a table with every party until they reached something workable. This is the woman my son married 16 years ago and the woman who has given this company more than most people in this room will ever fully understand. She paused. She belongs here. The sentence was not loud, but it landed like something dropped from a height onto marble. Rhys Dunbar did not move. She sat very straight, both hands folded in her lap, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes moved to Archer. Archer said nothing. That silence was its own answer. Camille had not been looking for the truth when she found it. That was the part that stayed with her later. She hadn't gone searching. She'd simply been doing what she always did. It was a Thursday afternoon in March, 4 months before the gala. She was dropping Archer's gray overcoat at the dry cleaner on Wellington. The one with a slight pulling at the left shoulder, she'd been meaning to have looked at for weeks. She always checked the pockets before handing anything over, because Archer had once lost a flash drive, with a full project pitch because she hadn't. The inside breast pocket held 2 things. A hotel key card from the Rimrock Resort in Banff, and a folded note on small cream stationery that read, in handwriting she didn't recognize, "Thursday can't come fast enough." Camille stood at the dry cleaner counter, and looked at those 2 objects for a long moment. The woman behind the counter said, "Everything okay?" "Yes," Camille said, "sorry." She folded the note back along its original crease. She placed both the card and the note back into the inside pocket. She handed the coat over and asked for the Saturday pickup. She walked to her car. She sat in the driver's seat and stared at the parking lot for a very long time. She did not cry in the parking lot. She drove home. She did not cry at home either. She went to her office off the hallway. The small room she'd claimed years ago when Archer began needing the study for calls, and she sat at her desk and looked out at the elm tree in the backyard, the one they'd planted the summer they moved in. It was taller than the roof now. She thought about what she knew, not what she suspected, what she actually knew. The key card was from the Rimrock. Archer had been in Banff in February for a client meeting. He'd come home on the Sunday and kissed her cheek in the front hallway, and said the meetings had gone well and was she hungry. There was a Thai place still open. She'd said she'd already eaten. He'd made himself a sandwich and they'd sat in the same kitchen and he had looked at her with the same face he'd always had. And none of it had been true. R. Rhys Dunbar, senior partner, the Calgary expansion. 2 days later, Camille pulled up the company's shared project drive. She was still on the distribution list for most files, had been for years, and found the communications log for the Calgary project. She saw the meeting notes from February, the client calls, the site visit in the 3rd week of the month. Rhys Dunbar's name was on everything. She didn't need anything else. She closed the laptop, went downstairs and started making dinner. What came after that was the slower kind of pain. The shock had lasted perhaps 2 hours out there in the parking lot on Wellington. What replaced it was something quieter and far more exhausting. The understanding that this had been happening while she was present, while she was inside the house, while she was running the machinery of their shared life, so smoothly, that Archer never had to think about it at all. She thought about the nights he'd come home after 10. Not unusual, he had always worked long hours. But now she counted them differently. The way you start hearing a word everywhere once you've learned what it means. Late November, a Tuesday. He'd said a contractor's report had come in and needed a full response by morning. He'd worked in the study until 1 a.m. She brought him tea at midnight. He thanked her without looking up from his screen. December, the week before Christmas. He'd gone to Calgary for what he called a quick site review. 2 nights, he called her once each evening, brief, distracted. When he came home he brought her a candle from a boutique in Kensington Market. She'd placed it on the bathroom shelf and thought how considerate. She had been planning a surprise weekend at an inn in Quebec City for their anniversary in April. She'd already put a deposit down, had been watching for a gap in Archer's schedule, had been quietly pleased with herself about it. She called the inn and cancelled. She told them something had come up. She was polite about it. 10 days before the gala, Adelaide called. Camille almost let it go to voicemail. She and her mother-in-law were not close in the way people imagined. Not cold either, but theirs had always been a relationship of careful courtesy. Each of them keeping their distance out of a shared instinct not to complicate Archer's life more than necessary. But Adelaide's calls were never casual. Camille answered. "Come for coffee," Adelaide said. "Friday morning, just the 2 of us." Camille went. The house in Westboro was full of morning light when she arrived. Adelaide had set out coffee and sliced fruit on the kitchen table. Not the formal dining room, the kitchen, which told Camille this was not a performance. They sat down and Adelaide poured without preamble. "I know about Rhys Dunbar," Adelaide said. The kitchen went very still. "A colleague of Archer's called me in April," Adelaide continued. "He'd seen them together at an industry dinner. He wasn't comfortable calling Archer directly. He thought I should know." She turned her coffee cup in her hands, just slightly. "I've been watching since then to see what Archer would do. Whether he would come to me, whether he would come to you." A pause. "He didn't." Camille looked at her. "You didn't tell me either." "No," Adelaide said, and she didn't look away. "I've been asking myself whether that was the right decision. I don't think it was. I'm sorry." Camille had not expected the apology. She absorbed it without knowing what to do with it. "The gala is in 10 days, Adelaide said. "I need to know how you'd like me to handle it. I won't do anything without your understanding." "What are you thinking of doing?" Adelaide met her eyes, making it impossible for this to continue quietly. Camille sat with that for a long moment. Outside, 2 sparrows were arguing in the garden. "Do what you think is right," Camille finally said. "I'll be there." Adelaide nodded once. They finished their coffee. They talked about other things. A planning committee meeting Camille had followed. A novel Adelaide was halfway through. An hour passed easily. When Camille stood to leave, Adelaide walked her to the door and said, without drama, "You are a good woman. My son should have known what that was worth." Camille didn't answer. She walked to her car and sat there for a moment, looking at Adelaide's front garden, the late May tulips still holding their color. She had thought she was alone in this. She had been wrong. The night before the gala, Archer came home from the office at 7. He poured 2 glasses of wine and talked about city council and a promising development corridor. He was in a good mood, energized the way he got when a project was moving. She remembered loving that energy in him early on, how it used to be something they shared. He asked if her dress was ready for tomorrow. She said it was. He said he thought the evening would be impressive. He was proud of the program they'd put together. Camille looked at him across the kitchen island. She thought about the note on Cream Stationery. She thought about the deposit she'd cancelled on the Quebec City Inn. She thought about the cold-smooth ease with which he'd looked at her every day for months, and offered her nothing true. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "About the gala?" "No. It'll be a good night." She said good, and finished her wine and went upstairs. She lay in bed and listened to him move through the house below, locking the back door, turning off the kitchen lights, the quiet routine of a man who still came home, who still slept in the same bed, who had simply decided honesty was optional as long as the surface stayed undisturbed. He wanted her to keep the house feeling like home, while he carried something else through the front door and set it down between them like luggage. She put down her book after 20 minutes. She hadn't read a word of it. Standing beside Adelaide in the ballroom, Camille watched her husband reach for words he didn't have. "Camille," Archer said softer now, "come sit up here please." The word please sounded strange on him, unfamiliar, the shape of something a person grabs for after everything else has fallen away. "Sit where?" Camille asked. He gestured toward the head table, toward seat 2. "In Reese Dunbar's place," Camille said. A small sound moved through the nearby tables, not quite a gasp, the sound of collective understanding arriving. "She can move," Archer said. Camille looked at him for a long moment. She was not shaking. She had expected she might shake, when she'd imagined this in the weeks before, the moment it became public, when the private knowledge she'd been carrying finally met the open air. But she was steady. More steady, she realized, than she had been in months. 16 years of these dinners, she said, quietly, without anger. 16 years at every table, every event, every negotiation where you needed someone who remembered names, who knew what to avoid and what to toast. I was good at it. I chose to do it because I believed it mattered to you. She did not look at Reese Dunbar. She looked only at Archer. And tonight you placed me near the service entrance so that someone else could sit beside you and look like she belonged in the life I built. Archer opened his mouth. Nothing came. "That's not a chair I need to reclaim," Camille said. "That's information." Adelaide closed her eyes for one brief second. Reese Dunbar had stopped looking at the table. Whatever calculation had brought her to that seat tonight was dissolving visibly, and she had nowhere to put what was left of it. Adelaide turned to the room. She did not look righteous or theatrical. She looked like a woman who had made a decision some weeks ago, and was now simply following through. "One more thing," she said. "Several of you know I've retained a position on the Thorne Group's advisory board since stepping back from operations. I also hold the founding trust that Frederick and I established before the company went public, a trust which includes a covenant regarding family integrity." She looked at Archer directly. Frederick insisted on that clause in writing in 2001, because he had watched another family business destroy itself over exactly the kind of thing we are standing in the middle of tonight. A pause that had weight to it. "That covenant is not decorative. It exists, it has teeth, and I intend to use them if necessary." The operations director sat up sharply. 2 board members exchanged a glance. Archer went very still. "This company," Adelaide said, and her voice did not waver, "was built on the belief that how you treat the people closest to you is the truest measure of how you'll treat everyone else. Your father knew that, I know it. I had hoped you did too." She looked at Camille. "Go home, I'll manage the rest of the evening." It was the first time Adelaide had called her sweetheart. Or perhaps she hadn't used the word aloud. Perhaps Camille only heard it in the tone. Either way, she felt it land somewhere it was needed. She reached out and briefly touched her mother-in-law's hand. Not for the room, just because she meant it. Then she walked out of the ballroom. The lobby was cool marble and quiet after the heat of the room. The coat check attendant handed back her wrap without a word. Outside Ottawa in early June was sharp and clean, the kind of night that can't quite decide if winter is finished. She stood on the steps and breathed the cold air and felt it move through her lungs. She did not feel victorious, she did not feel defeated. She felt for the first time in 4 months, like she could see clearly in every direction. The divorce took 11 months. Archer retained a lawyer the week after the gala. Camille had already spoken to hers the week before. She moved out of the house on Beechwood in late July, and into a rented flat in the Glebe, that was smaller than their old master bedroom, and had a kitchen window that looked directly into a maple tree. She liked it. She made coffee in the mornings and watched the branches, and thought about what she wanted to do next. She had not worked in her actual field since 2012. She held a master's in urban planning from McGill, and had spent 3 productive years at a firm in Gatineau, before stepping back to support the growth of the Thorne Group. She'd told herself at the time that it was temporary. In September, she called the firm. The principal, a woman she'd studied under and then worked beside, answered on the second ring. Camille explained where she was and what the years between had looked like. The woman was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you remember the Riverside Corridor proposal we submitted to the city in 2010? Camille said she did. She had written the land use analysis. The city just reopened the file for Phase 2. We're 3 people short of a proper team. A pause. "Do you want to come in Thursday?" Camille said yes. She wore the same dress she'd worn to the gala because it was the best thing she owned and she wanted to begin this on solid ground. The principal shook her hand at the door and said, "You look good." Camille said, "I feel better than I have in a long time." She meant it. Adelaide called every Sunday. Not long calls, 20 minutes, sometimes 30. They talked about the company when there was something to discuss, about the garden Adelaide was putting in at the Westboro house, about books, about Camille's work. They did not talk about Archer unless something practical required it. Once in October, Camille asked why Adelaide had waited until the gala to act. "Why not sooner?" "I wanted to see what he would do with the time he had," Adelaide said. "Whether he would come to his senses on his own, whether he would come to you." A pause. "He arranged your seating at table 11, that was my answer." "Were you angry at him?" "I was heartbroken," Adelaide said plainly without performance. "He is my son and I love him, but love isn't the same thing as permission." Frederick understood that. He wrote it into the trust because he'd seen what happened when families treated cruelty as a private matter. A silence. "I'm sorry you had to stand in front of 300 people to be defended. You deserved it sooner. In private I failed you there." Camille didn't answer right away. Outside, the maple tree had gone full October red, brilliant and temporary against the gray sky. "You showed up when it counted," Camille finally said. "That's more than most people do." Adelaide was quiet for a moment, then she said softly, "So did you." The Riverside Phase 2 project went to public consultation in February. Camille presented 2 sections of the land use framework to the City Planning Committee, standing at a lectern in a municipal hall that smelled faintly of old carpet and coffee, speaking about community density and green corridor preservation with the specific calm of someone who had recently survived difficult things, and come out knowing exactly where her energy belonged. The committee chair asked several sharp questions. Camille answered them without hesitation. After the session, a younger committee member stopped her in the hall and said it was the clearest presentation on mixed-use development she'd seen in years. Camille thanked her and drove home through the city in the early evening. Traffic moved slowly enough that she could notice things. A lit bakery, a father walking with a child on his shoulders, the river briefly visible between buildings as she crossed the bridge. She had done this drive hundreds of times over the years, always on her way somewhere that belonged to someone else's schedule, someone else's need. Now she was going home to the flat with the maple tree and the kitchen where she'd decided her own mornings. She parked and sat for a moment before going in. She had spent 16 years standing beside a man who had mistaken her steadiness for something he was owed, her loyalty for ownership, her silence for consent. She had stepped back from work she was good at because someone needed her somewhere else, and she had told herself it was love. Perhaps it had been for a while. Perhaps he had loved her the way people love the things that make their lives run smoothly, reliably, without question, until something newer arrived and the reliable thing became invisible. She was not invisible. She had stood in a ballroom in front of 300 people, and refused a chair that was never really the point, and the room had understood what that meant. More importantly, she had understood. She got out of the car and went inside. The maple tree was bare now, just branches against a pale sky. In the morning she would make coffee and look at it and think about the proposals due by Friday, and whether to call her sister in Montreal this weekend, and what she wanted to plant in pots on the small balcony come spring. She would think about what was next. There was a difference between being placed somewhere and choosing where you stood. She had chosen. And that in the end was the only thing that had ever been fully hers to keep.